because it impacts the way that we actually understand the ecology and of course the management practices and our ethics and all of this sort of the deeper issues of what is an invasive and how do we treat animals and how do we engage with these species, animals and plants, obviously. So this led to my research question: is there a relationship between the most commonly used terms, invasive, exotic, introduced, and the described impact? And you remember from that earlier definitional framework from the USDA, human health, environment, and economy. So I applied Schneeberg, this political economy perspective on environmental issues, and I hypothesized that the characterization of a species as invasive will be more likely associated with economic impacts as maximizing the value of an ecosystem and its natural resource components characterizing modern society. So ecology is often an impact science, but labeling something in a way that invokes economic damage links back to a production science. So you want to emphasize the short-term solutions with the intent of maximizing an outcome and through these literatures. Okay. So to address this question, you see a method slide, yay! So I looked at the Web of Science database, which is a US-based database, and I looked at the first 30 articles returned for each search and sorted by the citations. So I looked at 90 abstracts total. I only looked at abstracts. This was exploratory, right? It's for a master's thesis. I wasn't trying to kill myself looking at every publication ever written on invasives. That would be, a lifetime work. And I did a content analysis and independently coded how these terms, invasive, introduced, and non-native, were being used. What corresponding health, environment, and economic language was framing them. And I used a logistic regression in data, which you don't need to know about. The big thing that you get from this slide, don't need to know about logistic regression, is that there was no statistical significance. So what that really means is that if I wanted to claim that there was, within these 90 abstracts that I looked at, that there was some strong link between the species term, invasive, and the actual language framing it around economy, environment, and human health, there wasn't a significant enough of a relationship. I only had 90 abstracts. It could be that I need to look broader, right? Look at more than 90 abstracts. It could be that I need to look at specific sets of literature. So there, like I said, this quantification is completely subjective because I created these variables. I could easily create other variables, and there could be a way to find a relationship between invasive and economy or economic impacts that I just haven't been able to achieve through my analysis. And I respect that. But I did want to try to create those links to be able to make these arguments and bring the attention and have an impact, showing how discourse is linked. However, I did find a really interesting connection in the species that were looked at in the 90 abstracts that I went through. A land plant was in 40% of the, of my sample abstracts, and aquatic invertebrates were 18%, land invertebrates were 21%. You don't actually see mammals really making it into the big screen at all. And you also see location having a big influence, where California had a whole set of abstracts just into itself. Most of the papers were focusing on species in North America, and if not in North America, then in Europe, Australia, or New Zealand. So you very clearly see the white western sort of impacts. There were references to Lake Victoria and other invasives in Africa, but with Lake Victoria, it's very clearly tied to economic interests, where the Dutch are, it's Nile perch. The Dutch actually have introduced the Nile perch and are exporting the Nile perch and tilapia out of Lake Victoria, so there's a very clear link to Western culture, even in those abstracts. One of the critiques I got was that I looked at a US-based database, Web of Science, so of course they're going to be more US-based, but I also looked at the funding sources for several of these publications, and they were mostly NSF or from the UK, so the studies that are being funded are for these Argentinian ants that are in California and are clearly in areas where people are getting a lot of money. So if you're from California, right, you can see the UCs up and down that side. So you're bringing attention to species not based on necessarily their global impact, but more so on how you can get grant money, first of all, and number two, where you are, where you're socially located in a position of power to be able to study something, right? So we may have more pressing concerns about kudzu, for example, but because maybe kudzu isn't framed as a significant of an issue, or if people in that area are in smaller colleges or not R1s, right? You can't play the game as well. then that's going to have a specific impact on what's considered invasive and the solutions that are offered and how people are addressing this. So the implications and future directions that I wanted to point to is that, right as Joey pointed out, species-dependent classifications. We really need to consider species and awareness of species-specific trends, and going back to this idea of looking at the aquatic, fungi, fish, amphibian, invertebrates, making distinctions about different management strategies for different sets of individuals, as opposed to saying we need to eradicate non-natives and approaching it from this very broad essentialist framework. I also think we need integrated management strategies when eradication is not feasible, and eradication is often not feasible. I mean, I say when is not feasible, but it's often not feasible, and it's often not even desirable, right? Because if it's eradication, it's through non-humane methods anyway. So we may want to think about how to have conversations with people who are working in the industry around invasive species, where we talk about, okay, well maybe long-term eradication of garlic mustard is not going to happen. Maybe we need to figure out how we can get locals in the community to come to this park and harvest garlic mustard to eat as pesto. So thinking about different ontologies, thinking about different ways of being in relation with invasives rather than this militaristic, xenophobic, and of course hegemonic ways of thinking about them. I also think that clearly there needs to be better recognition of the role of the human impact and disturbance in ecosystem vulnerability. But I don't know, I mean, that's like I'm preaching to the choir right here, so I'm not going to talk about that. And of course, thanks to all my great people who back me up and pay for me to get here. And thanks to all of you for listening and having this conversation with me today.